Healing the Invisible Wounds. 4 Transformative Ways to Take Back Your Life After Narcissistic Abuse. The truth is painfully simple. The only mistake you made, the only crime you ever committed, was that you loved someone. You offered genuine affection, loyalty, vulnerability, and trust, and they weaponized every bit of that love to control, exploit, and emotionally imprison you. Psychologists often remind survivors that abusers do not wound you because you are weak. They wound you because your capacity for love, empathy, and connection is precisely what makes you valuable to them. The narcissist saw your humanity as a tool, something they could twist to keep you trapped. None of that was ever your fault. And today, as we explore 4 powerful steps to help you walk away from narcissistic abuse, we begin by understanding that healing is not about shame or blame. It is about reclaiming the parts of yourself that were manipulated and distorted by someone who never deserved you. The first step might sound deceptively simple, but it is one of the most transformative: humility. Survivors often ask psychologists, "Why can't I just move on? Why is healing taking so long?" What many clinicians have observed is that narcissistic abuse often provokes an unconscious ego battle between the victim and the abuser. The narcissist injures you, psychologically, morally, emotionally, and your mind instinctively responds with defensive pride, a need to prove yourself right, to show them they were wrong about you, to undo the injustice. This is not because you are naturally ego-driven. In fact, most survivors are the opposite. But prolonged exposure to a narcissist leads to emotional mirroring. Where they are petty, you become reactive. Where they are competitive and vindictive, you feel compelled to defend yourself. Psychologists explain this as a form of trauma-induced resonance, where the victim unconsciously adopts aspects of the narcissist structure in an attempt to survive. Humility, then, is not about submission. It is about releasing the defensive posturing that keeps you trapped in a psychological tug-of-war with someone who thrives on conflict. Ego keeps you in denial. Ego makes you argue with your therapist. Ego makes you reject the possibility that you may now be struggling with codependency, or that the relationship left you with complex PTSD. Ego insists you can win the moral battle, or resurrect the relationship, or prove something to someone who never cared about truth in the first place. Psychologists emphasize that healing requires neuroplasticity. Your brain must restructure itself after trauma. But neuroplasticity cannot happen in a state of rigidity. It requires openness, softness, humility. This is what trauma therapists call the EEN state, a mental posture of receptivity rather than resistance. There are times to fight, to assert, to stand up. But this phase of healing is not one of them. If you truly want to move on, you must allow yourself to say, "I lost. The relationship failed. I misjudged who they were. I didn't see the truth in time." This is not self-blame, it is acceptance. A therapeutic surrender. Much like a judo sacrifice move, humility is the willingness to let go in order to regain balance. The second principle is often misunderstood and purposely controversial: forgiveness. Survivors sometimes panic when therapists suggest it, imagining they must absolve the narcissist of their cruelty. But psychologists clarify that forgiveness in the context of trauma recovery is never about pardoning the abuser. In fact, forcing forgiveness too early is its own form of gaslighting, one often rooted in cultural or spiritual conditioning that pressures victims to release their anger before they've even processed their pain. Traditional forgiveness toward the abuser is neither necessary nor healthy. What is essential is emotional processing, grief, and integration. You must allow yourself to mourn the fantasy of the person you thought you loved. You must grieve the version of yourself who trusted them. You must accept that this chapter is finished. But forgiveness, true psychological forgiveness, has a different target: yourself. Survivors of narcissistic abuse often carry crushing moral injury. They believe they should have known better, left sooner, detected the lies earlier. They feel ashamed, contaminated, foolish. These feelings are not accidental. They are planted. Narcissists systematically colonize the victim's moral compass. Freud described the superego, or the Überich in its original German, as the internal voice that guides moral judgment. Narcissists infiltrate this system, rewriting your sense of right and wrong. They convince you that your reactions are irrational, your needs are selfish, your boundaries are cruel. Over time, Psychologists observe that victims adopt the narcissist's voice as their own internal critic, making independent morality almost impossible. This internal hijacking is why survivors struggle so deeply to forgive themselves. Their superego has been replaced with the narcissist's accusations, their empathy reshaped into self-blame. But healing requires reclaiming this territory. You must be able to say, "I forgive myself for loving someone who misrepresented themselves. I forgive myself for being misled, manipulated, and seduced into a situation I could not have fully understood. I forgive myself for staying longer than I should have, for believing their apologies, for hoping they would change." This is not weakness. This is restoration. Psychologists emphasize that self-forgiveness is the doorway out of trauma's freeze response. Without it, the survivor remains trapped between fight and paralysis, unable to move forward. And finally, healing requires acknowledging a painful truth. Evil exists. Emotional cruelty exists. Some people cause suffering not because they are wounded, but because they benefit from the chaos they create. This recognition is not meant to make you cynical. It is meant to free you from self-doubt. If you can accept that someone like your abuser is capable of deception, manipulation, and intentional harm, then you will be far better equipped to protect yourself in the future. It is through this clarity, this return to your moral center, that you begin to reclaim your identity, rebuild trust in your perception, and step forward into a life no longer controlled by the psychological residue of someone else's darkness. But here is the part most victims never expect. Once you begin reconnecting with others, once you step outside the emotional quarantine the narcissist forced you into, something strange happens inside you. Psychologists often describe this as nervous system recalibration. Your brain, which has been conditioned to anticipate threat and rejection, begins to relearn safety through small, non-threatening interactions. A simple conversation at a cafe, a casual laugh with someone at a yoga class, or even a brief exchange with a stranger at the grocery store can act as micro-corrections to your trauma-altered worldview. Your amygdala, which had grown hypervigilant from months or years of manipulation, slowly reduces its alarm signals. This is why therapists insist that connection is not optional. It is medicine disguised as human presence. Yet this process often comes with fear. Many victims mistake their anxiety for a sign that they should withdraw again, not realizing that their nervous system is firing old danger signals simply because it does not yet understand that the war is over. Clinically, this is known as trauma-conditioned avoidance. And without someone explaining it, many victims sabotage their own healing. So if you feel scared when connecting with others, understand, this is not a sign you are unsafe. It is a sign that your body is still living by rules the narcissist wrote into your nervous system. Psychologists call this the ghost of the abuser in the body, and recognizing it is the first step in exorcising it. As you move deeper into recovery, something else becomes clear. You are not fighting the narcissist anymore. You are fighting the psychological architecture they built inside you. That third element, the fantasy, the illusion, the shared psychological space Lacan hinted at, is what you are dismantling. Victims often assume they must process the person, but really, they are processing the structure. This structure is sticky, seductive, and persistent because it was built through intermittent reinforcement, emotional highs and lows, and the psychological equivalent of narcotic bonding. Psychologists call this dual representation trauma, where the victim holds two conflicting realities at once: the person who hurt them and the fantasy of who that person pretended to be. Healing means stripping the fantasy of its power, not attacking the person, but dissolving the third entity, the shared illusion. And when the fantasy dissolves, something profound occurs. Victims begin to retrieve lost parts of themselves, their spontaneity, their creativity, their ability to dream without fear. Clinicians often describe this stage as self-retrieval or post-traumatic individuation. It's the moment the victim realizes that the narcissist did not break them. The narcissist simply disconnected them from their original self. And reconnection, once it starts, is irreversible. You cannot unlearn your worth once you taste it again. This is where community becomes vital in a new way, not just for support, but for recalibrating your internal definition of normal. When you surround yourself with people who do not punish you for your emotions, who do not weaponize your vulnerability, who do not siphon your empathy for their personal gain. Your nervous system receives corrective emotional experiences. Over time, these experiences overwrite the narcissist's programming. You begin to trust again, not recklessly, but wisely. You begin to open up, not blindly, but with boundaries shaped by the pain that once threatened to break you. Psychologists frame this as earned security, the ability to build a healthy attachment even after profound betrayal. Eventually, with enough support and enough inner work, the victim faces their most important psychological transition, stepping out of the identity of the abused one. Many survivors cling to this identity longer than they realize, not out of weakness, but because it becomes familiar. It becomes the lens through which they understand their past, their relationships, even their place in the world. But you cannot build a future while wearing the ruins of your history as armor. Therapists guide survivors through this delicate stage with tremendous care, helping them shift from survival mode to growth mode. It requires confronting grief, accepting lost years, and acknowledging the version of yourself that was never allowed to exist during the relationship. And though this process is deeply personal, one truth remains consistent across all psychological literature. Recovery is not linear. There are relapses, echoes, memories that strike you at unexpected moments. Trauma bonds do not dissolve suddenly. They unwind, slowly and painfully, like a knot pulled tight by love and betrayal. But each time you challenge the old narrative, each time you breathe through the panic instead of collapsing into it, you reclaim territory inside yourself that the narcissist once occupied. You become more whole, more aware, more authentically you. Eventually, you reach a point where the narcissist no longer feels like a threat. They simply become a chapter, dark, instructive, and closed. Your nervous system no longer reacts to their memory with fear or longing. Instead, you feel something surprising: neutrality. This is the psychological definition of release. It is the moment your inner child stops running, the moment your adult self steps forward and says, "We are safe now." And from there, your life begins again, not as a reaction to trauma, but as an expression of who you truly are. A more conscious human being, a more grounded, self-respecting, self-aware version of yourself. Someone who understands love not as sacrifice, but as reciprocity. Someone who understands boundaries not as barriers, but as acts of self-devotion. Someone who understands that you never needed to be perfect, you only needed to be free.